Good morning. There's trouble in the paradise of Jehovah's Witnesses. It's no longer the solid phalanx of the faithful, 144,000 of whom alone will stand by the side of God after being born again. I have in my studio this morning Peter Gregerson, who is regarded now by the witnesses as an antichrist because he resigned and was involved in a great kerfuffle at the top levels of the Board of Governors over the resignation of another man. I also have here James Penton from Lethbridge, Alberta, he is an excommunicant for his actions apparently which upset the ruling bodies of the Watchtower Society. Not often you get these kind of cracks in an organization which many people look at and think, now there's a solid group. They know what they're doing and where they're going. Maybe it's not the same today. But we're going to start off the top this morning with the man who is regarded as an antichrist by some, and the man who was excommunicated from the Watchtower Society. After the break. I've always had a sneaking regard for the Jehovah's Witnesses, not merely because of their incredible dedication and standing on wet, miserable street corners with the little Watchtower pamphlet, not merely because of their incredible organization when they hold massive conventions, but because they fought the padlock law in Duplessis, Quebec, and they fought the Nazis, and many of them were put in gas chambers. But it seems that despite this dedication, which may have gone too far in some cases, there's considerable trouble. Big cracks at the top in the ruling body, the hierarchy, the Cardinal Council, if you like. And I'm going to get Peter Gregerson from Gadsden, Alabama, to tell me why you are regarded by some of the high-level Jehovah's Witnesses as an antichrist. What happened to you? What caused you to lose your faith in Jehovah's Witnesses?
Well, I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. From the time I was 3 years old, my dad was a very devout witness, and my whole life was centered around being one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I shared in a number of the activities of the higher Jehovah's Witnesses. At one point in 1976, after they had more or less predicted the end of the world for 75, the governing body called in about 50 elders from the United States to ask them what was the problem. Why are we losing young people? Why are elders quitting? What's wrong with our meetings and our literature and so on? And for several days I had a chance for the first time to find out that the problems of the Watchtower were not just in Alabama, but that the spiritual paradise that they talk about was riddled with problems.
You decided their teaching was false.
I found out that there were men at the top that did not believe some of it, and then I started a research program of my own that led me for a couple of years through many things that convinced me that Jehovah's Witnesses could not possibly be what they claim to be.
Let's take first the predictions of the end of the world. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. On the second coming, it was to be in 1870-something, wasn't it?
1874.
And then it was to be in 1920-something.
Well, at first Jesus came back in 1874. Then they changed that to 1914.
And then they changed it again till 1975.
Well, no, there's two different things that they predict. One is the return of Christ, and one is the end of the world. They started out by saying that the last days started in 1799, that Christ returned in 1874, that he began ruling as king in 1878, and that the end of the world would occur in 1914. Then, as those things didn't happen, they changed it all and said, no, what really happened is that Christ returned in 1914, and the end of the world will come in 1918. Then they changed it to 1925, then 1942, then 1975, and they still have a big problem in that area. When will the end of the world come? Armageddon.
And when people argued against this in the higher level, were they guilty of heresy?
Yes, indeed.
Now tell me about Franz, Raymond Franz, I think it was, who was one of the governing body until comparatively recently, and who was thrown out because he associated with you.
He was not only a member of the governing body, but he was one of the major writers for the Watchtower Society. He was in charge of producing the main reference work of Jehovah's Witnesses, Aid to Bible Understanding, and a number of the other books of recent years were written or directed by him. He had some problems with the matter of grace. Should a Christian earn his salvation, or is it really a matter of his faith in Jesus Christ?
Oh, I thought if you had the proper witness of his faith, you became one of the 144,000 alone who stood at the side of God after the great day of judgment.
Well,
is that nonsense?
It is nonsense.
That you are the Antichrist. How dare you say that when this is the dogma of this very powerful organization?
Well, it's true. It's not a very funny thing when you're going through it. If you've been raised as a part of it and all your life you've been conditioned to believe that whatever they say is true, it's a very agonizing experience to come back out of that brainwashed condition.
After a lifetime with the witnesses, Franz, this big shot, and witnesses resigned, had coffee with you or ate in your restaurant or ate with you, and he was promptly disfellowshipped.
He was pushed out of the governing body. He had no money. I was a friend of his, offered him a place to live in Alabama where I live. We gave him a few days' work in a supermarket outfit that I am a partner in, and so I was a landlord to him. I was a direct employer, and technically, according to the rules of the Watchtower, you can eat with an Antichrist as long as there's an employer-employee relationship.
You can?
Yes. That's an interesting little sidelight. But at any rate, we did eat dinner together. One person pointed it out, took it to the elders. They communicated with Brooklyn, and the result was that this man, after 40 years of tremendous effort for Jehovah's Witnesses, was thrown over for one charge and one charge only. He ate with a wicked man. And as he told them, he said, if you can show me that Peter is a wicked man, I will humbly crave for forgiveness. I will never eat with him. I will never talk to him.
But by that time he was disillusioned about the whole deal.
Well, to some degree he was. That's true. Indeed, yes.
Now we come to the Canadian. You are a Canadian.
Yes, I am.
And your name is Jim Penton. Penton.
Right.
From Lethbridge, Alberta.
Right.
You were excommunicated by the witnesses. When? Because you were on my program some years ago as a devout, dedicated, glassy-eyed witness.
That's right. Too glassy-eyed at the time.
Why were you excommunicated?
I began to see some of the same things that Peter Gregerson saw. I had written one book on Jehovah's Witnesses respecting the fight for freedom in this country against the Duplessis government, War Measures Act, and so forth. Then I began to research another book on Jehovah's Witnesses, an overall study of the movement. And wherever I went, I saw fantastic oppression of a sort that was mind-boggling to me, particularly directed against intellectuals, professional persons, against anyone who claimed to have a heavenly hope. You see, the Watchtower Society said that the 144,000 were chosen by 1935, and only replacements for persons who had become wicked would be chosen by the Holy Spirit to go to heaven after that.
Oh, there was only a few places left.
Only a few places left, and I started proclaiming that I had a heavenly hope, and that got the dander up of some people. And then I saw that people who were mentally ill were being disfellowshipped because the Watchtower Society or the elders said that they were demonized. I saw people being removed as elders because they came back from holidays wearing beards. I know of a case in Ottawa of a woman who was taken back into one of these judicial committees, and she was questioned so severely that she collapsed, had to go to hospital. I became horrified.
An inquisition.
An inquisition, absolutely. And then I saw this take place with respect to my own family, my own son. His little girl had a very serious congenital disease. He had to spend a lot of time with her. The circuit servant came to the congregation. He was working full-time, going to university, and spending a lot of time with this sick child. His wife was a nervous wreck. The circuit overseer said, if he doesn't increase his hours in knocking at the doors, we remove him. And the elders in the congregation simply went along with this like a bunch of clowns.
Was he disfellowshipped?
He resigned. He and our daughter-in-law resigned.
You mean regardless of what his problems were, he had to stand at the corner and knock on the doors, or he was not a proper servant of Jehovah?
That's right. And
mental cases were questioned on potential heretical beliefs?
Absolutely. And I can document that. And I am doing so. I'm writing a book on the whole thing.
The anti-intellectualism, you had an interesting point on that. Now, if I'm a Jehovah's Witness, which is highly unlikely, but if I am, can I read the Bible at my will and pleasure without supervision?
The Watchtower Society within the last couple of years has said that you cannot understand the Bible without using the literature of the Watchtower Society, and some members of the governing body in Brooklyn have given specific orders for the workers at the Watchtower factory not to get together in study groups to study the Bible independently.
Give me that quote on anti-intellectualism, and what does it come from?
It comes from the September 8th, 1968 Awake, and it says, "Those who belong to the professional classes may be said to be fair samples of the fruitage of higher education. They form a sort of aristocracy of learning. Often they are proud, untouched by the needs of less fortunate people, opinionated, competitive, independent, and inconsiderate of others. They have deeply imbibed the godless theory of evolution. In their view, educated men, college and university trained, are the sole hope for progress. Who, for example, have substituted for the fine moral teaching of the Bible their human philosophies? Is it not the professional clergyman? And who are the ones today that are insistent upon having their own way and openly flouting the authority of God's word in the matter of the sacredness of blood?"
The Watchtower line is, if you're opinionated, educated, and competitive, and even thought about evolution, you are not a fit member of the Watchtower Society.
If you think for yourself, you're not regarded as a proper Jehovah's Witness.
At what stage were you excommunicated?
I was excommunicated in the spring of 1981, but I had left about a year before that.
Did that personally damage you being excommunicated, or were you free of the chains by that time?
Well, psychologically it didn't damage me.
Because you are a university professor.
That's right. But a great many...
How could you have got into it in the first place?
Like Peter Gregerson, I was raised in it, and one of the things that kept me with the organization for a long time, I suppose, is the pressure of outer society and the persecution that Jehovah's Witnesses experienced.
Because they had done some brave, brave things, had they not?
They have indeed.
Do you say now that they have a twisted outlook on God and the Bible?
Absolutely. There is no question. If there was even one chance in 1,000 that they could be right basically, I would have never brought it up to my children.
What's going to happen to the Watchtower Society? This is the first time within my long experience I've ever had anybody even criticize them from within, or recently within the organization. Peter Gregerson from Gadsden, Alabama. James Penton from Lethbridge, Alberta, after the break. Celebrated leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses, like this man Franz, who is now ostracized, have described the Jehovah's Witnesses as a hermetically sealed organization. Every doctrinal blip or scintilla of sin is closely monitored. Now, you've broken away.
Yes.
There's not a thread of witness left in you.
Oh.
Or is it? Thread.
How can you leave 50 years and just vacuum it out of your mind? It's a part of you, and that's why I needed to clean it up for my children and my grandchildren so they didn't carry that legacy.
Do you now believe that this organization is so damaging to individuals that you want to destroy it?
It isn't a matter of I have no particular interest one way or the other on destroying anything, but I want very much for people that were raised like I was as a part of it to have an opportunity to think, because I had a unique situation. I looked behind the kimono in New York. I was there at a special meeting. I had an opportunity to spend months of research that the ordinary person doesn't have time away from his job to do. I learned some things that I feel compelled to make available to other people.
Line them out, 1, 2, 3.
The most important thing with me in the beginning was if the watchtower is what it claims to be, a term called a faithful and discreet slave, if it does have a divine appointment by God, then no matter that it abuses its authority from time to time, if God Himself has assigned that organization to be the feeder of spiritual food, then I'd have to go along with it.
You're telling me you've got to be a faithful and discreet slave?
No, the watchtower claims about itself that it is the faithful and discreet slave, that it is the only organization on earth, all other religions being of the devil, that in 1918 Christ Jesus came and deliberately examined the watchtower in great detail, and in early 1919 came to the conclusion that no other organization had any standing before God and Jesus Christ, and that they alone were to dispense correct and accurate spiritual truth.
Do you regard this as outright bigotry?
I went back to check it. I went back and took the 1918 and 1919 time frame and said, if Jesus Christ came to this conclusion as a result of examining the spiritual food that was dispensed in that time period, I needed to find out about it myself. So I examined that evidence.
What you found disillusioned you?
Beyond belief. There is no way to describe the shock that I got as I started to go into the specifics of the things that were taught by Jehovah's Witnesses in 1918 and 1919. It's the most incredible experience I've ever had.
In brainwashing?
In the fantasies that were taught as the teachings of Jesus Christ, that the last days started in 1799, that Christ did indeed return in 1874, that He began ruling as king in 1878, that the end of the world would come in 1918, know that it'll come in 1925, know that all Jews would go back to Jerusalem, that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would begin ruling in the fall of 1925 at Jerusalem, that Revelation 12 describes the birth of a man-child that Jehovah's Witnesses now say is the kingdom. They said then it was the papacy, and it goes on and on and on with the terrible untruths.
What kind of life was it to be a witness? They always seem well-dressed, well-fed, well-organized, well-disciplined, great organization. What kind of life?
It was a doer life, a severe life, and you were always afraid of what was going to be said to you by the people in control, even the elders, and I was an elder.
For children, any Christmas celebrations?
No Christmas celebrations.
Presents?
No presents, no birthday celebrations of any kind. The only thing that they celebrate are wedding anniversaries and the memorial of the Lord's death. And it's a very austere life, and the problem is that it goes beyond this. There are dress codes. For instance, I know many men who have had elders walk up to them and tell them to cut their sideburns shorter because they were too long, or to remove their mustache or shave their beard. And
Did you have a mustache like that when you were in the witnesses?
Not quite like this. I've had a mustache for a good many years. I suppose I grew it partly because I said that as a free person I have a right to do what I like.
Do you feel a free person now?
I thank God that I'm free from that organization.
You're still a Christian?
You bet I am.
You?
Oh, yes. And I think he raised a very important point. I grew up believing the only happy people were Jehovah's Witnesses, that no true happiness could be found anywhere else on earth, and I found it to be exactly opposite of that.
What about blacks? Are there blacks in Jehovah's Witnesses?
Many.
Oh, there are many.
Yeah.
There's no discrimination at that level.
There's no discrimination at the lowest level. There is discrimination at the higher level.
Dogma changes briefly in the last few years.
Dogma changes unbelievably. To give you an example, Jack, up until 1969, the Watchtower allowed people to have organ transplants, such as cornea transplants, kidney transplants. Then suddenly, from 69 to 1980, it became cannibalism and impermissible. My mother-in-law, who is now 86, went 10 years ago, and the doctor told her she needed a cornea transplant. Since then, when our whole family left, she has left as well, but she went back to the doctor. Now she could have a cornea transplant according to Watchtower dogmatism, and the doctor now says it's too late. And this sort of thing has happened over and over again. Marriages have been ruined.
Blood. What about blood transfusions?
Well, It's another one of those inconsistencies of the Watchtower. They say abstain from blood, but yet you can use blood particles for certain things. For instance, in gamma globulin shots. They're dishonest, and there is real trouble on the blood issue at the headquarters in New York.
Will Jehovah's Witnesses phone in to call you antichrists and heretics? Or will they not associate with you in public now?
They will not, and I would think many will not call in. Now and then I think you will find somebody that feels strongly enough that they'll address the question to you and not speak to us.
You give me a telephone number. You want to gather dissident Jehovah's Witnesses in this area?
We want to leave a number where anyone can contact who is in difficulty.
I'm in the middle here.
Very good.
How do I know which sect has the right God? I haven't yet made my final choice.
Well, we wouldn't
give the number.
We wouldn't ask anybody to turn to a sect, but to Christ. The number is 420-2258.
And you know my number's there. See what kind of reaction we get to these two anti-Jehovah Witnesses?
Not anti-Jehovah's Witness.
Ex-Jehovah Witnesses.
Ex-Jehovah's Witness. Yeah.
Outspoken ex-Jehovah Witnesses.
All right.
And now outspoken Christians.
After the break. Two ex-Jehovah Witnesses, Peter Gregerson from Gadsden, Alabama, and Mr. Penton. Dash, I've got a problem with your name this morning. Jim Penton from Lethbridge, Alberta. Tell me about the finances. Is it a wealthy organization with vast money like some of these evangelical foundations, vast universities, and compulsory tithing?
No, it isn't. And one of the best things that could be said about Jehovah's Witnesses is that in general the organization has not been a money-grubbing organization. But they do exploit their workers, and in late years they have gotten into the stock market, and also we've looked at their returns in Ottawa within the last few years, and unlike the past, and anyone can check this out for himself, unlike the past, they show much more penchant for material gains than they did 10 or 15 years ago.
Why are they being so tough now on backsliders? They weren't so tough before.
Many, many, many people among Jehovah's Witnesses are starting to think, and they take a piece of paper and a pencil, and there's a teaching that says that the generation, they take Jesus' words, this generation shall not pass away till all things are fulfilled. They claim that the generation of 1914, the people that were alive in 1914, will still be alive when the end of the world comes. That included the 60-year-olders, the 40-years, the 20-year-olders of 1914. Now, at this point, the 20-year-older that was of 1914 is like 88 years old.
Oh, so therefore those who are going to surround God are near death.
Yes, and there are not many left, and they're stuck with this primary teaching that says this generation will not pass away till the end of the world comes.
So the end of the world must come now.
It must come very quickly.
To fulfill the prophecy and maintain their dogma.
They're already trying to figure out a way, I know this for a fact, to try to figure out a way to change the doctrine, but because of what's going on, the ferment, the people starting to think, they're very much afraid of it. So they don't want me to be talking with anybody. They want to build a 13-foot wall around me.
In other words, now, to maintain the faith, they're going to have to make the 1914 date later and bring the end of the world further down the road.
Exactly.
Otherwise, they lose all their adherents who have a chance to be at the side of God.
And they've done that in the past, but it's a little tougher in today's world. There are more thinking people, more skeptics.
And people like you talking on television to vast numbers of people.
That may help.
Without a blessing of Jehovah's Witnesses. I hope they don't tag me as an antichrist.
No. I'm sure they don't think that.
Go ahead, please. Keep it short, sharp, and succinct. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you.
Yes, I'm an atheist, actually. I was visited by a number of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I have allowed them through my door to have discussions because I wanted to understand what it was.
What's your point?
My point is that I have had discussions about their religion. They have mentioned the 1914 date, and I've asked them, look, if in the event that this does not come to pass, what is your excuse going to be then? And they said, but it will. And I said that I'm going to wait until the year 2021, and everybody is going to be dead then, and then undoubtedly there's going to have to be another date.
Fair enough, you're right. What with Reagan, however, and Brezhnev, and who knows what in the Middle East, the Jehovah's Witnesses could be closer to right than we think. Go ahead, please.
Yes. My parents are Jehovah's Witnesses, and for several years now they've encouraged me to Bible studies and whatnot. And mind you, though, I have had several of them, but I myself do feel that if I was ever to become religious, that I would be a Jehovah's Witness. But at the same time, what I can't understand, pardon me, that you're saying is that you found fault with the Jehovah's Witnesses. Is that true?
Very definitely.
Why did they ever?
Yeah, okay, but now, see, what I can't understand, okay, I don't have a deep enough understanding of their religion, but from what I've seen from the Bible studies and from going to their studies and to their book studies and theocratic school, is that, like anything that they've said, they've always showed it to me in the Bible.
Okay, there you are. She's convinced.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here, because I know how entrancing it is, how fascinating and how pleasant it all looks.
How secure it can be.
And the security that it gives. I understand all of that very, very well.
And to this girl you say briefly what?
I say to her there's nothing but pain and disillusionment and heartache down the road.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Wester?
Yes?
This is Steve Woodward of Canadian Agnostic Society.
Well, you're not involved in the Jehovah's Witnesses, and now what can you offer to this except to attack all religion?
No, I just want to ask a question to Mr. Gregerson and Mr. Penton.
Okay, ask the question.
Okay, to the two of them. Now, you both claim to have outgrown the brainwashing of the Jehovah Witness belief. I wonder if you maybe might not believe that a further maturity would have you
outgrow all religious belief and become an agnostic.
Well, that has not happened. I have no idea of what may or may not happen, but the contrary is true with me. I find greater satisfaction and love for the Holy Scriptures. My own personal relationship with Christ in God is better than it ever was during the 50 years that I was a Jehovah's Witness.
Ditto. All I can do is echo that.
Go ahead, please.
Morning, John.
Morning.
Yeah, you mean to say that if the witnesses come to your door, and if you're another religion, that they believe that it's the work of the devil?
All other religions are called Babylon the Great. Every other religion on the face of the earth has its origin in Satan the devil.
Well, they better not come.
Not just the Roman Catholic Church. No, seriously. Not just the Roman Catholic Church.
All other religions.
All Babylon.
Babylon the Great.
Yeah, well, I'm not Catholic.
Okay, bye. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yep.
Yeah, there's two things that really bother me about the Jehovah Witnesses. I find them highly critical of all government policies, and yet they take no part in the vote of the country. And the other thing that bothers me is that I have people, family, in the prairies that live by the Bible. And yet I'm told by Jehovah Witnesses that these people, although they live according to the Bible, have no place in heaven.
Okay, hold on, ma'am. Two very good points. Let's take the first one first,
Well,
though.
let him take the first one.
You take the first one.
I think he can do better.
What was the first point?
The first point, I think, was on the witnesses' separation of church and state and their belief that there should be no involvement in politics. Yes, that's a common stand taken by a lot of religions, but while I don't think that there's anything wrong with that particular position, what I do think is wrong is the way that Jehovah's Witnesses have condemned everybody and been so completely legalistic about the whole matter and so thoroughly unloving. So I would agree with the lady in her response to their unloving behavior over the whole matter.
In other words, they will use the laws to fight duplessity, but will take no part in changing the law.
Essentially, that's right.
And as far as this matter of what happens to all the other people, now we've talked about all other religion. Now the fact of the matter is, Jehovah's Witnesses teach that every man, woman, and child will be killed at Armageddon who is not one of Jehovah's Witnesses and be dead. Now, and a short time ago, the president of the Watchtower, in a talk to a French assembly in New York, in answering a question on this, said as to why little babies and children that have never had a chance to buy a Watchtower magazine should be killed forever, said, well, little rats become big rats.
It's an arrogant religion. One more short segment with the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses after the break. The calls are good, but Peter Gregerson from Gadsden and to Mr. Penton from Alberta, what happens to your friends when you resign? What happens to your life when you resign from the Jehovah's Witnesses after a lifetime?
Well, that was one of the things that caused me so much anguish. First of all, I had to decide what would happen to my children and my grandchildren and those yet unborn, and that was a serious matter. And on a practical level, I had to ask myself, since for 50 years, all my life, I'd been a witness, every friend in the world that I had, and every real friend, was a Jehovah's Witness. And to say goodbye to those people that I loved so much and to know that they were going to turn away from me was not an easy thing to face up to.
What interference do they have in marriages?
Oh, it's quite terrible. Up until 1972, the only ground for divorce was adultery. And if a woman was married to a man who was a homosexual or committing bestiality, she still had to render the marriage dues to him. Then in 1972, that was broadened to include such acts as a basis for divorce. Then they went on in 1974 and began to stipulate what married couples could do in their own bedrooms, and the elders had to get up before the congregations and talk about the horrors of masturbation and oral and anal sex. And if a woman didn't like her husband's approach to her, she could not only divorce him, but he would be excommunicated. And then in 1979, they turned around and said, well, the Bible doesn't say anything about this in the Bible, or these matters. And as a consequence of that, here were people who had been excommunicated, had had their marriages broken up by what they later admitted themselves was false doctrine, but never a word of apology to anyone.
Did a witness being divorced go through the civil courts?
Yes, that's right.
That's one thing they accept.
Yeah.
Quite incredible. Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Hello, I'm not a Jehovah's Witness. I'm not particularly offended when they come to my door. They seem to be quite genteel, but that doesn't take away from the fact their doctrines might be wrong. But it says that there are many ways to heaven. Were it not so, I would have told you. And I'm sure that in every religion, there are the negative and the positive parts.
In other words, you don't think they're nearly as bad as Mr. Gregerson and Mr. Penton say, is that correct?
I don't think that he's God, and I don't think he should be judging. I personally feel that there are many Christians in the Jehovah Witness. The Lord will look into their heart. I'm sure that there are people who have never seen the inside of a church that, in the sight of the Lord, are true Christians. I think it's the philosophy of your own life, and I think that him sitting there no more makes him a Christian by judging other people. We're told in the Bible, if you judge other people, you will likewise be judged. My Bible also tells me...
Okay, don't quote the Bible to me. Your message is clear. Peter.
Beg your pardon?
Don't quote any more. Go ahead, Peter.
I think she makes some good points. And if she understood me to be saying that I am here with a view to judging as though I could do what God alone can do, that's not my purpose at all. I understand the heartache and the trauma, the problem of disengaging from a religion that has become so harsh and so arrogant in its use of power that to become enmeshed with it can cause tremendous problems for your children and your grandchildren and your marriage partner. I know.
Go ahead, please.
Hi there. Just wanted to say the law came through Moses, but grace and truth through Jesus Christ. Jim Penton, I talked to you about last year sometime. My name is Jerry Wise, and I just wanted to say to you, may God be with you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, please.
Yes.
I'm really glad that you guys are really up on that program, and I'm really pleased that you are talking about this because it is such an important issue. I have two questions, and I will hang up. One is that how does the Watchtower Society explain the gifts of the Holy Spirit and also by salvation by faith and not works? And the other question is, did anyone ever tell you or read to you about the book 30 Years of Watchtower Slave? Thank you.
Thank you. Now, who wrote the book 30 Years of Watchtower Slave?
A fellow by the name of Schnell, who was a former Watchtower circuit overseer in both Germany and the United States. Yes, I've read it many years ago. On the answer of, with regard to faith and works, that was one of the things that I got in trouble for, that Ray Franz got in trouble for, because I said that salvation is through faith and not through works. And the Watchtower Society, and I can document this, teach both doctrines at the same time and don't even know that they're contradicting themselves.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Speaking to the gentlemen both, I'd just like to say I have watched one particular mother in question actually literally let her son die because of refusal of blood transfusion. I feel this was a great injustice when there's so many parents in the hospital fighting for the lives of their children, including myself. But also I would like to ask for your phone number that you repeated.
Okay, we'll give the phone number at the end of the program. Well, gentlemen, you'll continue on your evangelical campaign to attack the dogma and the dangers of the witnesses. Is that correct?
And not the people, not the ordinary witness at all.
You regard it as an evil organization because they regard you as an antichrist.
Not for that reason, because it does produce evil, in truth.
That's right. I agree completely, because it teaches false prophecy, false history, and really, if you want a description of the Watchtower Society and the leaders thereof, the best place to go is Jesus' condemnation of the scribes and Pharisees in Matthew 23.
Well, to witnesses watching this morning, when one of the big shots come in from the east or up from the south, be happy to give them equal time. My thanks to Peter Gregerson and my thanks to Mr. Penton. And I'll be back with a serious little discussion of Canada's new mini criminal code for children, youngsters, after the break.